Hey there. Picture this. It's the 1800s. You're standing on a wooden ship in the Arctic, soaked, freezing, hunting the largest animals on Earth, not for glory, but for oil. This isn't Moby Dick. This is wet, brutal business. Over 236,000 sperm whales were taken, and thousands of sailors vanished with them, lost to cold, hunger, and silence. Tonight, we're not talking about heroes. We're talking about systems, about how economics turned the ocean into a factory and cold into the price of survival. The myth of the romantic whaler, the brave adventurer chasing leviathans, is just that, a myth. Reality? This was dirty, exhausting labor. Sailors saw whales not as monsters, but as barrels of oil worth $40,000 in today's money. And every storm, every ice field, every wet night was a tax on their bodies. But first, get cozy. Seriously. Fluff your pillow, pull up a blanket, maybe even turn off the lights. This story's meant to be heard in comfort, because what they endured was anything but. If you're enjoying this, consider liking and subscribing, but only if it truly lands for you. And drop a comment. Where are you listening from? What time is it there? I love knowing who's out there in the quiet dark with us. All right, let's step into the world of whalers and northern fishermen and uncover how the sea became a factory and cold became the cost of life. Picture yourself falling overboard in the Arctic. The water doesn't just feel cold, it sucks your body heat away 25 times faster than air. That's wet cold. Not dramatic, not loud, just relentless. Dry Arctic air? You can handle that. But wet wool, icy spray, constant dampness? That's what killed most sailors. Not the temperature, but the wetness that turned their clothes into lead. Now listen. Hear the creak of ice underfoot, the hiss of your own breath freezing midair. Smell it. Wet wool, salt, and that faint metallic tang of fear. And feel it. Your fingers burning, not from warmth, but from early hypothermia. It's like working outside in a rainstorm, except the rain is ice and your Wi-Fi is whale oil. Here's the myth. You die in 10 minutes in cold water. Truth? A healthy adult can survive over an hour. But constant wetness from storms, sweat, or spray cuts that time in half through convection. This wasn't bad luck. It was systemic failure. Sailors weren't just cold. They were chronically soaked, and no one had a fix. And that wetness didn't stop at their clothes. It seeped into their ships, too. Every rope, every deck plank, every blanket became a sponge. There was no dry corner, no warm refuge, just endless dampness that turned the human body into a battery running on empty. You'd shiver not because you were cold, but because your body was screaming for fuel it no longer had. And the worst part? You couldn't escape it. Even below deck, the air hung thick with moisture. Your bunk stayed wet. Your socks never dried. It was like living inside a raincoat that never came off. And in that world, the real killer wasn't the ice. It was the water that clung to you long after the storm passed. Imagine your house is made of dry timber, and you're surrounded by moving walls of ice pressing in at walking speed. That's whaling in the Arctic. Their ships, barks and schooners, were built for the tropics, not ice. No metal reinforcements, no insulation, just wood that cracked like old furniture under pressure. The smell? Rotting timber mixed with salted meat and unwashed bodies. The sound? Not just wind, but the deep groan of hulls being squeezed by ice, like a giant slowly closing its fist. And the touch? Slimy, waterlogged planks under your boots, already splitting after hours in the flow. Historical truth? In 1871, 33 whaling ships were crushed by ice in a single day, not because of bad weather, but because their vessels were never meant for this. The myth? Victorian whalers had tough, ice-ready ships. Reality? They sailed paper boats into a meat grinder and called it bravery. It's like buying a Tesla for a desert safari. Stylish, sure, but it won't survive the first dune. And when the ice closed in, even the strongest captain couldn't save a ship that was already a coffin. But here's what made it worse. These ships weren't just fragile, they were leaky. Rain, spray, melting ice, it all pooled in the hold. Pumps ran constantly, but they couldn't keep up. So sailors slept in cabins that sloshed with water. Their food sat in damp barrels. Their tools rusted overnight. It wasn't just a ship, it was a floating sponge. And the irony? They were hunting whales for oil, while their own decks drowned in water. The very thing they needed to survive, dryness, was the one thing the sea refused to give them. Picture putting on a winter coat, only to find it's lined with a wet sponge. That's Victorian warm clothing. Wool and cotton absorbed water like towels. After one storm, outfits gained 2 or 3 kilograms, dead weight dragging you down, stitch by stitch. The smell? Sour wool, sweat, and the stale tang of fear. The sound? Not footsteps, but the squelch of your own clothes releasing moisture with every move. And the touch? Sticky fabric clinging to your skin like a damp newspaper. Here's the bitter truth. Indigenous peoples like the Inuit wore sealskin garments, waterproof, light, warm. But Europeans called it barbaric. Result? 30% of cold-related deaths were tied directly to clothing. The myth? Victorian gear kept sailors warm. Reality? It kept them wet and slowly killed them. Ironically, the very whale oil they hunted could have waterproofed their clothes. But no one thought of it, because everyone was too busy counting barrels. And yet, even dry and warm, they'd still sail into a storm. Because economics demanded it. Because one whale meant 40 barrels, and 40 barrels meant survival back home. But let's be real, their clothes weren't just ineffective, they were active enemies. Wet wool didn't just fail to insulate, it pulled heat from your body like a radiator. Every layer became a liability. And since most sailors owned only one set, there was no backup, no dry change, just the same soaked rags day after day, week after week. It's like wearing jeans in a snowstorm and wondering why you're freezing. Except in this case, your life depended on it. And the saddest part? They knew better. Logbooks mention sailors trading with Inuit for sealskin mittens, but captains banned it as unprofessional. So they chose pride over survival and paid for it in silence. Picture this. You're the captain of a whaling ship in the 1800s. You've been at sea for 6 long months and your hold is only a quarter full. Back home, creditors are waiting. Your crew watches you with tired eyes. And on the horizon, a sperm whale. Do you turn back from the coming storm, or do you chase it? This wasn't bravery, it was economics. One whale meant 40 barrels of oil, worth about $40,000 in today's money. And in that world, risk wasn't optional. It was the price of survival. Now, listen. Hear the wind howl through the rigging, sharp as broken glass. Smell the salt, the wet wool, and that faint metallic tang of fear that clings to every man on deck. Feel the damp chart in your hands. No safe route, just options with different losses. This is the myth. Whaling captains were fearless adventurers chasing glory. Truth? They were businessmen under pressure. In 1820, the crew of the Essex ignored storm warnings for a single whale. Result? The ship sank, and only 8 of 20 survived the open ocean. Not because they were unlucky, but because the math demanded it. It's like ignoring a red traffic light because you're late on rent. You're not reckless, you're trapped. And in that world, every decision was a gamble with lives. But here's the cruel part. Even if you made it back with a full hold, your reward was barely enough to survive the winter. Most sailors returned poorer than they left, exhausted, sick, and in debt. Yet they went out again because there was no other option. And the worst irony? The very oil they hunted, the whale oil, was used to light the lamps of cities that never thanked them. They burned whale fat so others could read at night, while they froze in the dark. But even if you survived the storm, your food wouldn't save you, because what waited in the galley was its own kind of slow death. Picture your only meal today. Hardtack so dry it cracks like ice, and salted meat that smells like a damp basement. This wasn't poor planning, it was necessity. On whaling voyages lasting 6 to 12 months, food had to survive without refrigeration. Hardtack absorbed moisture from the air and bred flies. Salted meat lost all vitamins, leaving only salt, fat, and a smell that clung to your clothes for weeks. Now, listen. Hear the constant buzz of flies over your plate, even in freezing cold. Smell it. Rancid fat, moldy bread, and the sour tang of unwashed hands. And feel it. The gritty texture of hardtack crumbling in your mouth, mixed with sand from the ship's hold. It's like eating crackers that have been sitting in your garage for a year, except your life depends on every bite. Here's the myth. Rum and hot tea kept sailors warm. Truth? Sailors got only about 2,000 calories a day, but surviving the Arctic required 4,000. That deficit meant constant weakness, scurvy, and fading vision. Rum didn't warm you, it masked the cold while speeding up heat loss. And tea? Often boiled in the same pot as salted meat, so it tasted like ocean and despair. Meals were served on wooden plates crawling with insects. Water came from melted ice, but it was stored in barrels that once held whale oil, so every sip carried a greasy aftertaste. And if you got sick, no one cared. You ate anyway because skipping a meal meant falling behind in strength, and on a whaling ship, weakness was a death sentence. It's like trying to run a marathon on energy drinks and stale chips. You won't die immediately, but your body starts eating itself. And in that world, even hunger became routine. But even if you were fed, your body was already breaking down, because sleep was a luxury the sea refused to give. Imagine working on deck for 3 days straight. No sleep, no dry clothes, just constant motion and cold. Now add nausea so deep it makes your bones ache. This wasn't just seasickness, it was systemic exhaustion. When you're constantly vomiting, you lose not just food, but water, electrolytes, and the will to move. And when you can't sleep because the ship groans like a dying animal, your brain stops working rationally. Now, listen. Hear the slosh of bilge water underfoot, mixed with the groans of sick men in their bunks. Smell it, vomit, wet wool, and the metallic tang of fear. And feel it. The sticky surface of your cot, never dry, never clean, just damp with condensation and sweat. It's like trying to rest in a washing machine that never stops spinning. Here's the myth. Seasickness is just a temporary nuisance. Truth? In Arctic voyages, 40% of crews suffered chronic seasickness. That meant weakened immunity, slower reactions, and double the risk of fatal mistakes. In the North Water logs, captains wrote, "Men too weak to haul lines, lost to the sea by dawn." Not from storms, not from ice, from simple, grinding exhaustion. There were no sick bays, no medicine, just a bucket and a corner. And if you couldn't work, you didn't eat. So sailors forced themselves upright, even when their hands trembled and their eyes couldn't focus. It's like showing up to your office after 3 sleepless nights, except your keyboard is a harpoon, and one mistake means death. And the cruel irony, the very motion that made them sick, the rocking of the ship, was also what kept them alive. Because stopping meant ice, and ice meant the end. But even in this collapse, humans found ways to endure, not through strength, but through rules, rituals, and shared silence. And that's where our next chapter begins. Picture yourself falling overboard in the Arctic. The first minute isn't about thinking, it's pure shock. Your breath vanishes, your muscles lock, your brain screams, "Get out!" That's the 1-minute window. If you stay calm, you get 10 minutes to act. Grab the rail, signal for help, pull yourself up. And only then, maybe an hour before consciousness fades, like your phone dying on 1%. Now, listen. Hear your own shallow breathing, sharp and fast. Smell the salt water in your nose, mixed with that faint metallic tang of fear. And feel it. The slick wood of the ship's rail, slippery under numb fingers. It's like trying to unlock your phone with wet hands, except your life depends on it. Here's the myth. The 1-10-1 rule is a universal survival law. Truth? It was invented in 2004 for TV. Real whalers knew better. Survival didn't depend on fixed minutes. It depended on whether your crew saw you fall, and whether they threw a line before panic spread. In the North Water logs, captains wrote, "Man overboard, never seen again." Not because of time, but because of chance. And the cruel part? Panic cuts that 10-minute window in half. A calm sailor might survive. A panicked one sinks faster. It's like ignoring your car's warning lights because you're late. You don't lose time, you lose your chance. But even if you made it back on deck, your next mistake was already waiting in the galley. Because that bottle of rum wasn't warmth, it was a trap. And in the damp, freezing dark, even the smallest mistake could be your last. Think about it. You're exhausted, soaked, shivering. Your hands won't stop trembling. You just want to sit down, but sitting means stopping circulation. You want to close your eyes, but sleep in wet clothes is a one-way ticket to hypothermia. Every instinct fights every survival rule. And that's the real trap, not the cold, but the body's own betrayal. Historical records show that in over 60% of overboard incidents, the sailor wasn't pulled back because no one saw it happen. The ship was too big, the crew too tired, the sea too loud. So the 1-10-1 rule wasn't just wrong, it was dangerously misleading. It made people think survival was about individual will, when in reality, it was about community, visibility, and luck. And luck was in short supply in the Arctic. Imagine returning to the ship after a storm, soaked, shivering, exhausted. Someone hands you a swig of rum. It burns your throat. You feel warmth spreading through your chest, relief. But that warmth is a lie. Alcohol doesn't heat you, it tricks you. It widens blood vessels near your skin, and all the heat your body fought to keep, it leaks out faster. Now, listen. Hear the quiet glug of rum in the bottle, mixed with groans of tired men. Smell it. Sharp alcohol, wet wool, and the sour tang of fear. And feel it, the sticky wooden table under your palms, cold despite the drink in your hand. It's like opening your windows in a blizzard because you feel hot. You're not warming up, you're speeding up your own collapse. Historical truth. By the 1840s, doctors knew alcohol increased heat loss by 20%. But tradition overruled science. In the 1871 disaster, when 33 ships were crushed by ice, many sailors who drank rum to warm up simply fell asleep on deck and never woke. This wasn't bad luck. It was a cultural failure. The myth? Rum saved lives in the cold. Reality? It masked crisis while deepening it. It's like drinking an energy drink when you're exhausted. You don't gain energy, you just hide your fatigue until it crashes harder. But even if you avoided the rum, your body had another trap ready. Because as hypothermia set in, your mind began to betray you. And in that fog of cold, even your own hands could feel like strangers. Rum wasn't just served for warmth, it was used as currency. A good day's work might earn you a shot. A mistake could cost you your ration. So sailors drank not just for comfort, but to prove they'd earned their place. And that social pressure made the physiological danger even worse. Modern survival guides now explicitly warn, never use alcohol in cold environments. But in the 1800s, it was standard issue. Ships carried barrels of it like they carried rope or sails. And that normalization turned a simple drink into a silent killer. The bitter irony? The very oil they hunted, whale oil, could have been used to waterproof clothes, seal seams, even fuel small stoves. But no one connected the dots, because in the rush for profit, comfort was an afterthought, and survival was left to chance. And chance rarely favored the wet and weary. Picture standing on deck as ice closes around your ship like giant jaws. Your hands are numb, your breath is ragged, and all you want is to run. But where? The water's colder, the cabin's damp. In that moment, panic becomes your worst enemy. Because when your brain loses control, your body does irrational things. You shout, you thrash, you tear off your clothes, even though it's -20. Now, listen. Hear the creak of ice, mixed with the cries of men who've lost reason. Smell it, wet timber, salt, and that static-like charge of fear in the air. And feel it, the sticky fabric of your own coat, which you're peeling off because you feel too hot. This isn't madness. It's the paradox of undressing, a physiological glitch where a freezing brain sends false signals of warmth. Historical truth. In 30% of recovered whaler bodies, they were found partially undressed, not by choice, but by biology. In the Essex disaster of 1820, panic during the storm led to chaotic evacuation, and only 8 of 24 survived. The myth? Paradoxical undressing is rare insanity. Reality? It's a common endpoint of hypothermia, and panic doubles its speed. Ironically, silence was the best survival tool. Men who stayed calm had twice the chance of rescue. But in a world where every shout could be your last, staying quiet took superhuman will. And many sailors didn't just undress, they hid in corners, curled up like children, whispering to ghosts. Logbooks from the North Water region describe men talking to spirits for 3 days straight. This wasn't folklore. It was the mind's last attempt to create warmth through imagination. It's like your phone dying in -20 degrees. You don't rage at it, you just hold it closer, hoping the battery lasts one more minute. But in the Arctic, there was no charger, only silence and the slow fade of thought. But even if you kept your head, your life might still depend on something you couldn't control, whether your lifeboat could survive the ice. Imagine your ship is crushed by ice. You scramble into a lifeboat with 20 others. It looks sturdy, wooden, with a sail, even a small water cask. But within an hour, ice builds on the gunwales, and water seeps through the seams. This isn't rescue. It's a temporary delay of disaster. Because whaling lifeboats of the 1800s weren't sealed. They had no insulation. In the Arctic, they often sank faster than the ships that launched them. Now, listen. Hear the constant slosh of water in the bilge, mixed with groans of exhausted men. Smell it. Salt, fear, and the damp rot of untreated wood. And feel it. The slimy oars in your numb hands as ice slowly encases the boat like a white cocoon. It's like sitting in a canoe with a hole in the bottom. You're not sinking fast, but you're sinking for sure. Historical truth. In the 1871 disaster, only 20% of crews who took to lifeboats actually reached shore. The rest either froze, drowned, or were forced to return to sinking ships. The myth? Lifeboats guaranteed survival. Reality? They became death traps without proper design. It wasn't until the 1920s that sealed, insulated models became standard. Lifeboats were often overloaded, sometimes with 30 men in a boat built for 15. And if you were injured, you got the wettest spot. No priority, no mercy. Just survival math. It's like booking an emergency exit seat on a budget airline only to find out the door doesn't open. You paid for safety, but got theater. And even if the boat held, your greatest threat might be sitting right beside you. Because in crisis, social pressure made men hide their exhaustion to avoid looking weak. Picture working on deck for the third straight day without sleep. Your hands tremble, your eyes burn, but you don't stop because your crew is watching. In whaling culture, fatigue wasn't a warning sign, it was a weakness. And weakness meant losing your share of the oil, or worse, your place on the ship. Now listen. Hear the constant creak of rigging, mixed with muffled groans of exhausted men trying not to show pain. Smell it, wet wool, salt, and the sour tang of sweat that hasn't been washed off in weeks. And feel it, the rough rope burning your palms, even though your fingers can barely grip. It's like pulling an all-nighter before a big presentation, except your presentation is harpooning a 40-ton whale. Historical truth. In Arctic voyages, 40% of losses were tied not to storms, but to overwork. Sailors pushed past their limits because they feared being labeled soft. Logbooks note, "Man fell from mast, did not rise." Not because he was clumsy, but because his body had nothing left. The myth? Whalers were naturally heroic. Reality? They were economically trapped. Their share of the catch depended on the ship's success and their own visible effort. So they worked until they collapsed. Many sailors chewed tobacco not for pleasure, but to stay alert. But nicotine constricts blood vessels, worsening cold exposure. They traded short-term focus for long-term risk. It's like using energy drinks to power through burnout. You're not healing, you're just delaying the crash. And in the Arctic, the crash was often final. But even if you rested, your refuge, the cabin, was its own kind of trap. Imagine returning to your cabin after a storm, hoping for warmth and rest. Instead, you're hit by a thick fog of unwashed bodies, wet timber, and mildew. Cabins on whaling ships were tiny, overcrowded, and almost airtight. Men slept 4 to a room, and the air didn't refresh for hours. In that humidity, moisture condensed on walls, creating a perfect breeding ground for bacteria. Now, listen. Hear the labored breathing of sick men, mixed with the drip of condensation from the ceiling. Smell it. Rancid oil, stale sweat, and the sour tang of pneumonia brewing. And feel it, the sticky surface of your bunk, never dry, never clean, just damp with shared breath and fear. It's like sleeping in a tent after rain, with no ventilation and 10 people inside. Historical truth. In 19th century voyages, 20% of crews developed pneumonia or tuberculosis before major storms even hit. Why? Not the cold, but crowding and dampness. Logbooks from the North Water region state, sickness began in cabins, spread in a week. The myth? Cabins were warm shelters. Reality? They were disease incubators. There were no sick bays, no quarantine. If you coughed, you stayed in the same space, infecting everyone. And since most sailors couldn't read, hygiene instructions didn't exist. It's like working in an office with 30 people and no AC during flu season. You're not getting sick from the weather, you're getting sick from the system. But even in this collapse, humans built rules to survive. Not through technology, but through ritual, hierarchy, and shared silence. And that's where our next chapter begins. Picture this. You're on deck during an Arctic storm. Ice groans like a dying beast. Wind steals your words. And your only lifeline is the voice of the captain. Sharp, clear, absolute. In this world, hierarchy wasn't about ego. It was about survival. One wrong move, pulling the wrong rope, stepping in the wrong place, and the whole crew could vanish under ice or into the sea. Now, listen. Hear the crack of the captain's voice cutting through the wind. Smell the mix of wet timber, salted meat, and the sour tang of fear that clings to every man. And feel it, the rough rope in your numb hands, pulled not because you want to, but because you must. It's like working in an emergency response team with no radios, where silence means death. Here's the myth. Whaling captains were tyrants by nature. Truth? Discipline was a safety system. In the 1871 disaster, when 33 ships were crushed by ice, it was strict order that allowed crews to evacuate without panic. But that order often came through brutality, floggings, food rationing, isolation. Logbooks from the North Water region note, after the 1853 mutiny, the captain flogged a sailor not for theft, but for laughing during a storm. Not cruelty for its own sake, but a ritual of control. Because in chaos, even a laugh can shatter focus. Most sailors couldn't read, so rules weren't written, they were enforced. And fear became the language of safety. It's like having a Slack channel with no Wi-Fi, where the only way to stay synced is to obey the loudest voice. But even with perfect discipline, your body could still betray you. Because when you're wet, cold, and exhausted, even the best medical knowledge might not save you. Imagine cutting your hand on a splintered harpoon line. Blood mixes with salt water. You have no antiseptic, no bandages, just whale oil in the hold and a piece of wet cloth. So you smear the oil on the wound, thick, greasy, smelling like rancid meat, and hope it works. This wasn't medicine, it was improvisation born of desperation. Now, listen. Hear the quiet groan of the injured man in the corner. Smell the sharp stench of whale oil mixed with blood and sweat. And feel it, the cold, sticky liquid on your skin, clinging like a second layer of fear. It's like using coconut oil instead of Neosporin, except your life depends on it. Here's the myth. Whale oil was a miracle cure. Truth? It had natural fatty acids that could slow infection, but only if the wound was clean. On a whaling ship, where everything was damp and fly-covered, it often made things worse. In the logs of the Essex, sailors treated frostbitten fingers with oil, and some healed while others developed gangrene. The real issue wasn't the oil, it was the lack of hygiene. No clean water, no sterile tools, just hope and grease. Tobacco wasn't just for chewing, it was stuffed into wounds to stop bleeding. But nicotine constricts blood vessels, slowing healing and increasing infection risk. Sailors didn't know this, they just knew it numbed the pain. It's like taking painkillers for a broken bone and pretending it's fixed. But even if you avoided infection, your biggest threat might come from the people you trusted most. Because in isolation, even silence can become dangerous. Picture meeting an Inuit hunter on the Arctic shore. He's wearing a sleek, waterproof suit made of sealskin. You're shivering in soaked wool that weighs like a sandbag. You look at him with a mix of envy and disdain, because Victorian culture called his ways barbaric. But when you lose a finger to frostbite, and he doesn't, you start to ask, how? Now listen, hear the quiet exchange of gestures, no shared language, just hands pointing, eyes watching. Smell the smoke of seal fat lamps mixing with the damp rot of your own clothes. And feel it, the smooth, dry texture of sealskin under your fingers, repelling water like a modern raincoat. It's like getting iPhone tips from someone who's never seen electricity, but somehow knows how to make it last all day. Here's the myth. Europeans completely ignored indigenous knowledge. Truth? They did ignore it at first. But after disasters in the 1840s, when hundreds died from cold, captains began hiring Inuit as guides. They adopted sealskin clothing. They learned to read ice patterns. By the 1860s, many whalers wore hybrid gear, European cuts with indigenous materials. The shift wasn't out of respect, it was out of survival. Even when they adopted the clothing, they rarely credited the source. Logbooks called it local adaptation, never Inuit wisdom. It's like using an open source app and never mentioning the developer. But even with better gear and knowledge, the sea still had one final trap. Because isolation doesn't just freeze your body, it freezes your mind. Picture being at sea for 6 months straight. No land in sight, just gray water and gray faces. Your dreams start smelling like salt. This wasn't just loneliness, it was chronic social isolation. Whaling voyages lasted 6 to 12 months with no breaks. In that void, the mind began to fray. Hallucinations, depression, unexplained anger. Now, listen. Hear the constant creak of the ship, mixed with tired voices repeating the same stories for the 100th time. Smell it. Wet timber, unwashed bodies, and that static-like charge of fear that never leaves. And feel it, the sticky surface of your bunk, where you lie wondering if you'll ever see grass again. It's like working in a windowless office with no weekends, except your Wi-Fi is whale oil and your break room is a bucket. Here's the myth. Whalers were mentally tough adventurers. Truth? In North waterlogs, 1/4 of crews suffered from what they called cabin fever, a deep depression with paranoia. One captain wrote, "Man spoke to ghosts for 3 days, wouldn't stop." This wasn't weakness. It was the brain's response to endless monotony and cold. There was no privacy, no therapy, just shared silence and shared despair. And in that pressure cooker, even a glance could spark a fight. It's like being on a Zoom call that never ends. You don't lose your mind all at once. You just forget what silence feels like. But even in this mental fog, humans built systems to cope, not with science, but with superstition. Picture this. You're on deck, and your captain forbids whistling. "Whistling calls storms," he says. You roll your eyes. Until a real gale hits a week later. Suddenly, you catch yourself before making a sound. This wasn't just old wives' tales. It was psychological armor. In a world where ice could crush your ship in minutes, superstitions gave the illusion of control, and that illusion kept panic at bay. Now, listen. Hear the quiet muttering of charms mixed with rain on the deck. Smell it. Tobacco smoke, chewed to ward off evil spirits, wet wool, and the faint metallic tang of fear. And feel it, the smooth bone talisman in your pocket, worn like a modern power bank for luck. It's like checking your weather app every 5 minutes. You know it won't change the forecast, but it makes you feel ready. Here's the myth. Superstitions were irrational folklore. Truth? They structured fear. No women on board wasn't just sexism. It prevented jealousy-fueled fights in tight quarters. Cats bring calm wasn't magic. Cats killed rats that ruined food and spread disease. Even red clothes bring blood had logic. In a fight, red hid stains and delayed panic among the crew. The not-so-glamorous reality? Many sailors believed dropping a needle meant bad luck. So they hoarded every scrap, even rusted ones. Not out of greed, but out of hope. It's like wearing your lucky shirt to a job interview. You know it won't help, but without it, you feel exposed. And in the Arctic, where every breath could be your last, even the smallest ritual became an anchor. Because when the sea offers no guarantees, humans invent their own. Imagine this. Your pay depends not on how hard you work, but on whether the ship returns full. This was the lay system, a brutal but brilliant motivator. If you didn't help your mate hull the harpoon, you got nothing. If you didn't save the captain in a storm, you saw no profit. Survival wasn't individual, it was collective economics wrapped in shared risk. Now, listen. Hear the quiet clink of coins during payout, mixed with tired sighs. Smell it. Whale oil on paper contracts, signed with a thumbprint because most couldn't write. And feel it. The rough texture of that contract, binding you to strangers for months. It's like having a shared crypto wallet with your team. If the project fails, you all lose. Here's the myth. The lay system was fair for everyone. Truth? Captains took 50 to 60%. The rest was split among 30 men. But this imbalance forced cooperation. In 1871, crews with strong internal trust had double the survival rate. Why? Because they shared food, watched each other's backs, and never left a man behind. The ugly truth? Many hid whale oil in secret barrels, just in case the ship sank. Not out of greed, but fear. Court records from the 1860s note, sailors stole oil not for profit, but for insurance. It's like freelancing on commission. You don't get paid unless the client pays. So you help your teammate close the deal because your rent depends on it. And in that world, trust wasn't kindness, it was currency. And without it, even the strongest ship was just a coffin waiting for ice. Picture this. You're in the Arctic today, wearing a dry suit, sitting in a sealed lifeboat with GPS, thermal blankets, and a satellite phone. You feel safe. But that safety didn't appear from nowhere. It's built on the frozen bones of whalers who sailed wooden ships into ice fields with nothing but wool coats and hope. The turning point? 1871. In a single day, 33 whaling ships were crushed by ice off the Alaskan coast. Hundreds of men abandoned ship. Many didn't see another spring. But their loss became a lesson written in maritime law. Now, listen. Hear the quiet hum of your modern life raft's heater. No creaking wood, no groaning ice. Smell clean plastic and dry fabric, not rancid whale oil and wet timber. And feel it, the smooth, waterproof surface of your suit, repelling every drop like magic. It's like having a fully charged phone during a blackout, except your battery is 2 centuries of hard-won wisdom. Here's the myth. Shipwrecks were just bad luck. Truth? They were systemic failures. Whaling lifeboats leaked, wool clothing soaked. No one tracked ice movement. After 1871, international conventions demanded sealed, insulated boats with proper buoyancy. By the 1920s, survival rates in cold water jumped by 80%. Not because sailors got tougher, but because systems finally caught up. The not-so-glamorous reality? Early rescue kits still included rum, not for warmth, but because old habits die hard. It's like keeping a flip phone in your emergency kit today, just in case the grid fails and 4G disappears. You know it's outdated, but it's all you've ever trusted. But even before technology, humans were already mapping the invisible, not for science, but for survival. Picture this. You're a whaler in the 1800s. Every morning, you log wind direction, ice movement, and sky color, not for science, but to avoid death. You don't know it yet, but your damp, oil-stained notebook will become a climate scientist's treasure 2 centuries later. Now, listen. Hear the scratch of pen on wet paper. Smell ink mixed with salt, unwashed wool, and the faint tang of whale oil. And feel it, the rough, water-stained pages under your fingers filled with notes like ice moving north, 2 miles per day. It's like filling out a Google form with no internet, except your answers help map the entire Arctic. Here's the myth. The Arctic was an uncharted wilderness. Truth? Whalers created the first large-scale ice maps through sheer necessity. Their logs, from the North Water region and beyond, tracked sea ice, storms, and currents with surprising accuracy. By the late 1800s, these records became the foundation for early meteorological science. This wasn't exploration. It was quiet, desperate cartography. The not-so-glamorous reality? Many captains couldn't spell north, but they knew exactly how fast ice closed in. Because when your life depends on it, you notice everything, even the way fog clings to a berg at dawn. It's like your Fitbit tracking sleep. You think it's just for you, but aggregated, it helps researchers understand global health trends. Similarly, thousands of whalers, just trying to survive, built the first real-time climate database of the far north. And that data didn't just sit in archives, it saved lives in war. Imagine you're a medic during World War II. A pilot has been pulled from the North Sea, blue-lipped, barely breathing. You don't rub his skin. You don't give him rum. You wrap him gently in dry blankets. And wait. Why? Because decades earlier, whalers' logs showed that slow rewarming doubled survival chances. Now, listen. Hear the quiet rhythm of shallow breathing returning. Smell clean wool and fresh air. No mold, no salt rot. And feel it, the gentle warmth of shared body heat, passed hand to hand like a secret. It's like letting your phone charge slowly to preserve battery life, instead of forcing a fast charge that damages the cells. Here's the myth. Hypothermia is a quick, silent killer. Truth? The human body can endure extreme cold for hours if you don't panic and don't rush recovery. Whalers who huddled together lasted far longer than those who thrashed alone. Their logs noted, "Men who stayed calm saw dawn. Those who ran vanished by midnight." During World War II, this became standard protocol. Thousands lived because of lessons paid for in frozen silence. Early rescuers used snow to cool burns from frostbite, making tissue damage worse. It took decades to unlearn that mistake. But once science caught up, those old whaling journals became medical gold. It's like knowing not to yank a USB cable mid-transfer. You wait because the system knows best. And that respect for the body's limits came from men who froze so we wouldn't have to. Picture this. You're looking at the ocean today, and you don't see whales. Not because they're hiding, but because we nearly erased them. In the 1800s, over 236,000 sperm whales were taken, not for sport, but for oil. Each whale yielded 40 barrels, worth about $40,000 today. And every barrel came with a hidden cost: frozen sailors, crushed ships, and entire ecosystems pushed to the brink. Now, listen. Hear the silence where whale songs used to echo. Smell the clean salt air, free of rancid oil, because international bans finally took hold. And feel it, the weight of a modern conservation report in your hands, stating plainly, we almost lost them all. It's like looking at an old photo of a forest that no longer exists and realizing you're part of the generation that stopped the chainsaws. Here's the myth. Whaling was a sustainable tradition. Truth? It was an economic free-fall. As whales grew scarce, ships sailed farther, deeper, longer, increasing crew deaths and ecological damage. Logbooks from the North Water region tell the story. No whales seen this week, but debts remain. This wasn't culture. It was greed disguised as necessity. The not-so-glamorous reality? The very oil that lit Victorian cities also fueled the destruction of the species that produced it. And when the whales vanished, so did the whalers' livelihoods, leaving ghost fleets and broken communities. It's like mining your own backyard for gold until your house collapses. You get rich for a season, then you have nothing. But this collapse sparked something unexpected: the birth of modern environmentalism. Greenpeace didn't start as a protest. It began as a reaction to systemic failure. And that lesson echoes in every plastic-free choice we make today. Picture this. You're a sailor in the late 1800s, returning to the ship after a brutal shift on deck. Your clothes are soaked, your hands are numb. Someone offers you a swig of rum to warm up. You hesitate, because you've heard the new orders. Alcohol doesn't warm you, it accelerates heat loss by 20%. But the social pressure is strong. Everyone expects you to take it. Refusing feels like admitting weakness. Now, listen. Hear the quiet clink of a thermos being passed instead of a rum bottle. Smell herbal tea mixed with salt air. No sharp alcohol sting, just the faint earthiness of dried leaves. And feel it, the warmth of a ceramic mug in your hands. Simple but effective. It's like swapping an energy drink for water during an all-nighter. You don't get the buzz, but your body thanks you. Here's the myth. Rum was essential for morale in cold climates. Truth? By the 1870s, maritime doctors had proven it increased hypothermia deaths. Fleets began banning it as a warming agent. Result? A 30% drop in cold-related fatalities. This wasn't just policy, it was a cultural shift. Sailors stopped seeing rum as comfort and started seeing it as risk. The not-so-glamorous reality? Many still hid bottles in their gear, not for warmth, but for the ritual. It's like keeping an old hoodie you never wear, just because it feels like home. And in the damp, freezing dark, even the smallest ritual could feel like a lifeline. But even with better habits, the sea remained the ultimate teacher, because it doesn't care about courage. It only cares about preparation. And preparation meant letting go of old comforts, even the ones that felt like salvation. Imagine standing on an Arctic shore today. The wind bites, the ice groans, but you're calm. Not because you're brave, but because you respect the rules. The sea isn't a romantic challenge, it's a neutral force. And those who ignore its laws vanish quietly, without fanfare. Now, listen. Hear the silence between waves. No cries, no panic, just rhythm. Smell the clean, cold air. No fear, no desperation. And feel it, the smooth surface of your modern dry suit, a gift from those who learned the hard way. It's like knowing your phone won't work in a basement, so you bring a flashlight. Not out of fear, but out of respect for reality. Here's the myth. The sea rewards bravery. Truth? In 1876, the bark Arctic sank because its captain ignored ice warnings, chasing profit over prudence. Everyone on board joined their ancestors, not because they were weak, but because they trusted myth over data. This wasn't tragedy, it was consequence. The not-so-glamorous reality? Even today, people test the sea's patience, ignoring weather apps, skipping safety checks, sailing overloaded boats. But the lesson from whalers is clear. Survival isn't about heroism, it's about humility. It's about accepting that some systems cannot be beaten, only respected. Modern survival training doesn't teach you to conquer the ocean. It teaches you to read it, prepare for it, and retreat when needed. That shift from conquest to cooperation is the quiet legacy of men who froze so we wouldn't have to. And in that legacy lies the deepest truth. The sea doesn't care about your story. It only cares whether you understood its rules. We've journeyed from wooden ships that cracked like kindling in Arctic ice to dry suits that repel every drop, from wet wool that weighed like lead to thermal layers that breathe, from rum-fueled illusions of warmth to science-backed protocols that save lives. But the core lesson remains unchanged. Systems always win. The whalers of the 1800s didn't fail because they were weak. They failed because they ignored the physics of wet cold, the economics of risk, and the biology of exhaustion. Their losses became our textbooks. Their graves became our guidelines. Tonight, as you lie in a warm bed, wrapped in clean sheets with a cup of tea nearby, remember them, not as heroes, not as victims, but as teachers. Their mistakes taught us to respect the sea. Their suffering taught us that preparation beats courage every time. If this story stayed with you, consider liking and subscribing, but only if it truly resonated. And drop a comment. Where are you listening from? What time is it there? I always love knowing who's out there in the quiet dark with us. Thank you for listening. May your sleep be deep and your dreams calm.